developer roundtable where we sit down and discuss the games that we're interested in. In this episode, I have Senpai with me. More developers were going to join, but unfortunately there were conflicts of scheduling. Just to let all developers know out there that are interested in joining in on this roundtable for the future, the recording is held every third Saturday of the month at 12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. That's 3 p.m. Eastern Time. In this episode, we are going to talk about what if a private server for City of Heroes came up that went the original direction that the developers had for City of Heroes, where there were no archetypes. It was literally just choose the powers you want. And the interesting story of why they actually have archetypes is really cool. The reason archetypes came about in City of Heroes is when they were in early development and they had an early alpha state of the game, they brought in people off the streets to play the game. And developers do this a lot. And what they'll do is when they bring these people off the streets, they don't tell the players anything. They just let the players run wild and figure things out for themselves. In the process of doing this, they noticed that a good chunk of the people that were playing the game were choosing nothing but offense or defensive and healing powers. So they didn't have any offensive attacks. So the fights were really long and really boring. And to fix this, they decided to go with creating the archetype system, which is the classes for City of Heroes. So with me having Senpai here, I want to get his thoughts on if it would be possible to do a classless or archetypeless City of Heroes version of the game and how hard it would be to do that. Senpai?
Yeah, I think that is possible with a lot of copying and pasting because a lot of the data in the game is actually just duplicated. Like if power set is proliferated, for instance, the psychic blast on defenders was eventually proliferated to blasters, and for the most part, it's really just copy and pasted code because the way that data works in City of Heroes, it doesn't like have class inheritance or any way of like referencing another thing that already exists. So the only way to like take one thing and put it in another place is to just copy it. And could probably do that where we just make like one archetype with one power set that just has like every power in it.
Yeah, and I've actually been thinking of this on the side of the user interface because I do a lot of user interface work with the game development work that I've done. I've been looking at user interface wise, and the way I see it is when you're creating your character, right now you have, okay, choose, are you a ranged attack, are you support, are you melee, things like that, and then it goes in and you choose your actual true archetype, whether you're a tank, a blaster, a controller, things like that, and then you choose your power sets and then powers. This could be reduced down a lot. And the way I see this actually working is that what you can do is when you click on create a new character, it brings up, okay, how are you wanting to divvy up your points? Are you wanting it more into damage? Are you wanting it more into defense? Are you wanting it more into health? Are you wanting it more into endurance? Things like that can be done there in the first choice. Then the next choice would be, what would be your default settings on how your character works? Like adding the abilities that the Brute has or the Dominator has, where you get this secondary or this third bar that lets you choose, oh, as time goes on, I deal more damage, or as time goes on, my control powers or certain powers get stronger, and then new ones can be added in, such as time goes on in the battles, my defense gets better, things like that. And then the final step would literally just be bars showing all the ice powers, all of the fire powers, all of the dark magma powers, all of the regeneration powers and things like that. And you could have a checkbox that you could use that would let you show all of the powers or just the ones that you can select for your levels. And we'd still keep the level settings for the powers the way they are now. And that's the way I sort of see the UI working out. What do you think of that, Senpai?
Well, again, on a technical level, I think we could probably do what you said about like picking if I have like a fury bar, but it affects defense instead of damage, for instance. Like we could do that with temporary powers and could pick your, not temporary powers, inherent powers. So you could probably have like a menu where you pick your inherent powers first, and you might have like a certain number of points that you can spend on inherent powers. Then you can go on to the next menu and you have like a certain amount of points you can spend on like attacks or support powers, and then so on.
Would you want to change the levels of any of the powers, or would you want to keep the levels the way they are now? How would you see that going in the way people choose their powers? Like, you know, for instance, let's say we take the fire set, and would you want to restrict it to 2 levels, or would you want it to be just complete freeform?
Some people have their own opinion on this. Like they think it's all a wash because when you're max level, you're going to have access to everything anyways. But for me, I really like how task forces force you to be a certain level, because the task force was designed to be played at that level. And also story arcs are really designed to be played at a certain level. So it can be curated for powers that you should have had at that level. Like for instance, I think it's like around level 12 or so, enemies start doing crowd control and mezzing you and stuff. And that's also when melee classes get access to their mez resistance. So, you know, it's kind of your choice if you want to pick that mez resistance at that time, or if you want to hold off and get another attack power instead. But you wouldn't get your mez resistance when you don't really need it yet. And well, also, like, what if we were to add an enemy really early in the game that has mez attacks before you're supposed to get your mez resistance? Then that's a way we could make an enemy particularly difficult and challenging in its own way at that level, because it can do things that a higher level enemy would have been able to do.
Yeah, and that is an interesting idea. Being a developer, I go by the psychological stance in the studies that they've done, and they show that people get more gratification and feel that they deserve those higher powers by working for them instead, getting them earlier on. And there's an actual study showing that your brain enjoys it a lot more than getting a power early on. So if you're given a really strong power early on, and then later on you're given a weaker power, there are chemicals in the brain that react to that, and you don't get the satisfaction as you would slowly creeping up on the powers that you gain. It's just the way the natural human brain works. And a lot of developers like sticking to that because that brings more enjoyment to the game. So in all honesty, I would stick with the levels that they and the way that they've leveled out all of the powers and keep it that way, because they've already done the studies and figured that out. And I'm on the thought of, if it's not broken, don't fix it. Why waste your time trying to readjust something that already works really, really well in that aspect part of the game? I'm just going back to the aspect of bringing it back to what they originally visioned for City Heroes for this part. And so what do you think of the psychological end that I just brought up of the levels of powers?
Well, honestly, that topic comes up a lot when I talk with other players, because as a player, not as a developer, but what I like to look at is on a case-by-case basis. I like when I'm level 15 and I'm doing a level 15 story arc, and the enemies are like specially designed to fight a level 15 character, and I have to like strategize around these enemies that were made, like a curated experience, I think makes a game a lot more fun. But a lot of other players like to focus on the progress of like from level 1 to level 50, where they like progressing for its own sake, and they like the feeling of like the numbers getting bigger and doing, getting more experience and more influence every level and stuff like that. But personally, I just like to focus on like each level needs to be designed for that level, and by restricting the powers that are available at that level, and especially creating enemies that can fight you at that level is really valuable to me.
That's the thing, is the main reason I'm looking at is if you take the controller powers and the dominator powers for controlling, you notice that they give you the root first, then they give you the hold, then they give you the group root, then they give you the group hold. And I think that was the smart way of doing things, because just like the way we learn things, you learned how to roll around as a baby first, then you learned how to crawl, then you learned how to hold yourself up by tables and couches and things like that, then you learned how to walk a bit while holding someone's hand and stuff like that, and then you were able to walk, then you were able to run, then you learned how to ride a bike. You didn't just straight off go into running and riding a bike, because then it will have made, once you learned how to walk, feel pointless and doesn't feel right. And that's where I think that pulls off for the brains in the way things are structured for how you gain things in video games. And that's a really big important step, because that's just how our brains are wired. It's what we enjoy the most. Now, I think a lot of players would sort of like this feel. I really don't know. I haven't had a chance to sort of do a statistics on this and get a bunch of people to respond to this. Senpai, what are your thoughts on if players would sort of like a server like this?
Well, some people like to call a server like that a fun server, which is kind of derogatory, but I think it has its place. Like sometimes you just want to relax and be like this really super powerful Superman or something that can just easily arrest every Hellion in Atlas Park if he wanted to. But like I think that there's still a lot of players that would like a challenge where, like even one Hellion could be a challenge if you're not prepared for it, kind of like Dark Souls or something. Like if you're not ready, one zombie could backstab you, and that's the end of the game.
Yeah, and I agree. And that's where, I mean, you could literally have two different of these servers. You could have one where you get to choose whatever power you want, and then you'd have another one where it's literally at this level, these are the powers that are available to you to give more of that difficulty. So you'd have that one server where you could literally be like Superman and have those high-end powers early, and then you could have another server where it's like, oh, you're new to this, you're still learning your powers will grow the more experience you get. And so I think it's all personal choice. I think the majority of people would prefer the more of that as you level up and gain experience, your powers get stronger and you learn how to use your powers more, as in the way of, oh, I learned the root first, then I learned the hold, then I learned the group root, then I learned the group hold. That kind of thing. And then also the other thing that adds into that is I wouldn't do any change to how enhancements work. I'd leave that completely alone. That's a totally separate thing in itself. I'm just talking about the idea of getting rid of the archetypes and making it to where you could have a character that has a couple of ice powers, and a couple of fire powers, and a couple of dark magma powers, and then maybe a pet or two. And that would really give you a lot of freeform on what you choose and do in the game. And so when you get your, like, let's say you choose the robotic drones from the masterminds and you choose that power set, it would still, at the first level you choose it, it would give you 1, and then 6 levels later it would give you 2, and then 6 more levels later it would give you 3. I'd still keep that in place. and make that sort of really nice and interesting. Any final thoughts that you have about the idea of doing a free-formed character creation per se, Heroes?
Yeah, one thing I thought was interesting is that the original developers ended up adding archetypes. I would assume that people would like pick all of the powers just to make it as cheesy as possible, like just be as OP as possible because you can pick whatever combination that works and just make a cookie cutter character that can just easily win anything. Because, you know, that's lots of variables that are hard to control, and it's hard to make like an actual challenge if you don't have any control over the variables. But it seems like it was interesting that people were picking things that aren't good and they were stressing themselves out because they couldn't pick good choices together. Like they were picking all of the healing powers and nothing else, and then they ended up frustrating themselves. So I thought it might be kind of like a bell curve as the game gets older. Early on, people might make really bad builds and end up not having a fun time because they just had a really bad build and frustrated themselves. And then towards the middle of the game, you start to see like really creative forms of gameplay where people are starting to discover interesting things that kind of work. And then towards the end, I think you'd end up with lots of people making these cookie cutter builds where they just pick like all these powers that are practically obligatory to take together, or else you're not optimal and there's not really any room for creativity. I think it would be that bell curve as the game gets older.
In a way, I agree with you, and in a way, I disagree with you. I see a way to fix the first half of the bell curve, the part where people are choosing all defensive or all heal powers. A warning can be put in at that section when you're choosing powers to say, hey, you might want to, mix your offensive with your defensive and just have a text warning there to let people know about it. And I think that would lessen that curve. As far as the cookie cutter, I don't know. A lot of City Hero players and superhero video game players, when they're given the option to create their own character, I seem to see that they go with a variety and a feel of what they like over min-maxing. And that's one of the reasons that I like the player base in City Heroes, is they're not all about min-maxing. They're all about having fun, showing their creativeness and their uniqueness. And that's what I think really makes it interesting, is I think you'd actually see not more cookie cutter styles, but you'd see more interesting, unique designs of heroes. You'd see a more diversity than we already have. Just like how we have with the costumes. People make the same build but use different costumes. The only reason they're doing the same build is because they're limited by the archetype system. Now imagine how it would be if you didn't have the archetype system and you just choose different power sets and feels to go with how you want your character to feel. That whole entire idea that they have, for instance, of the costume where it's fire and ice. You could literally make a character that does fire and ice. Right now, you can't do that. And so that's where I think the difference would be in my mind for this. Any other thoughts you have, Senpai?
Well, I'd like to respond to that because so it's an MMO. It's like should be a team-oriented game, but there's two problems with letting people just pick whatever they want in a team-oriented game. Is that one, you could make a character that's like so self-sufficient it doesn't need any support or it doesn't need any control because it can do everything just good enough. Or you could end up in a situation where like this kind of happens in Sea of Heroes already to an extent where a character's like so cookie cutter and just makes like just the most min-max character possible. And you can have a couple of those on like a league and doing like an ITF or something, and they'll carry the whole team and nobody else gets to do anything. If you're not cookie cutter yourself, you don't really get to participate. You're just gonna kind of be like a cheerleader.
Okay, yeah, I see what you're saying there. And in some ways, I agree with you. But I'm thinking if we just keep it to every even level, you get to choose a power and you're restricted to the level that you're at or below. So you could choose a weaker power, but what would end up happening is because there's only 50 levels that you get to choose, or 25 levels that you get to choose powers at out of the whole entire game, with the game going up to 50 levels, you would literally be limited. You wouldn't be able to have all of the powers. So if you did take a bit from healing and a bit from fire and a bit from, defensive stuff, you would be more of a jack of all trades. Whereas if you just purely focused on taking all of the ranged damage stuff and nothing else, or if you just took pets. But even then, I think there would need to be some balancing done on the pet side, because you don't want to have the ability to choose, I want to have the drones, I want to have the thugs, I want to have the beasts, I want to have the demons, and that's all your power sets are. And then you have this huge group of minions that are fighting on your side. I think there would need to be put in some restrictions and limitations. And that's the one thing I do want to bring up is We Have Cake does have in each archetype a freeform where you can mix the fire and ice, but you're still stuck in that archetype. So if you chose tank, you're stuck doing melee. If you chose blaster, you're stuck doing ranged, things like that, and don't have any defense. This freeform design would make it to where you're not just stuck in one area. You could mix your melee with controller damage and some mastermind abilities and stuff like that. The other thing that We Have Cake did is with the mastermind sets, they actually made it so that if you chose the robot drones, the first set of drones in there, the basic thugs, and then you got the next power set or time to level up, you could not go back in and then choose something like the very beginning thugs for the demons. So you couldn't have 6 pets that way. It locked the others of the thugs out for the masterminds. And that makes things really interesting to where no matter what, you were still stuck with the 6 pets, but you could have the first 3 be thugs, and then your 2 lieutenants could be zombies, and then your last one could be the giant robot from the robots and have that giant drone, and you still got those 6 there. And I think that's how it could sort of balance it out that way. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I was actually going to bring up Cake eventually. Pretty much everything pretty well. I like that you can't just have like all of the tier 1 minions and have like an army of like, how many would that even be? Like,
I really don't know. I see it more as, how thugs have the gang warfare where it's a limited time thing and you just have this huge group of mobs. I think it'd be like that, but permanent. And I think that would just break the game.
Yeah, well, I think on a less populated server, it wouldn't be too bad, but I think it just has like a lot of balance concerns to just have that many pets. Because if you think about it, one minion has infinite hit points, and I'll tell you my reasoning for that is, enemies do a big spawn will do like an alpha strike where they'll just hit you with their best shot.
Mm-hmm.
And if you send one minion in, it only has so many hit points, but it'll suck up all of their damage. So it practically has infinite hit points. And if you just have enough minions to send in like that, you never take any damage.
Yeah, exactly. They do in a way because you can heal them and stuff like that. But I, doing my community masterminds with the streams that I stream a mastermind character, I have had, in fact, not this last Friday, but the Friday before that, I had all of my minions get wiped out in a fight, and I barely got out myself. So there is that chance of losing them, but still, the bigger amount, the more minions you have, the less likely that happens. And I think that's where you need to sort of gauge that type of thing.
Yeah, I think their freeform is pretty cool because it does still restrict by level, and not just restricting by level, but also if you pick like a tier 1 power, you only get to have one tier 1 power. You can't have like all tier 1 powers.
Yeah, and I agree with I somewhat agree with that. I think if a person wants to choose all the tier 1 powers and be level 50 with all the tier 1 powers, that's their choice because they have the enhancements to boost those. But I don't think that a level 1 should have a tier 50 power.
Yeah, because again, I look at restrictions as a tool for helping to curate a challenge or a fun experience in a
Hmm.
game. So I like to try to control variables and add more variables that can be controlled. And it's not because like I'm a control freak developer and I want you to run in my little rat maze. It's because I'm a player too, and I really like a good challenge. And I see all of these variables that can be controlled as a way of creating an interesting challenge that you can't just cheese your way around using your infinite choices to find the cheesiest way to win.
Yeah, I agree with you 100% on that because if I find a game where I can just blow through everything and it feels so powerful right away, I get bored very quickly and then I move on. And that's the reason why I don't play on some of the classes or archetypes on We Have Cake because it literally has that feeling of I'm bowling through everything and this is just really easy. I don't like that feeling. I like to be challenged. I like that feeling of having to struggle and worrying. You know, it's just like when I used to play EverQuest. That challenge there was okay, I need to make sure I do not get taken out or I don't die because if I do, I'll lose some experience. I could lose a level and I have to go back and get my body to get all of my equipment and I could be bound on the other side of the continent or on a whole entire different continent. And so that's a 2 or 3 hour travel just to get back to the body. And so that caused the challenge right there. Plus, I was also limited on the powers I had. So there was a lot to that on going on those high end raids that made things challenge. I don't like easy to run through stuff. It's not fun for me. It's very boring after a while. I get that immediate high of, oh, look at this. This is so cool. But that wears off shortly. Whereas if you're growing in power and growing with the challenge, that excitement feel lasts longer and longer. So I'm with you 100% there. Overall, I think that this could be done, and I'd love to see a private server do something like this. What about you, Senpai?
Yeah, I really want to try more servers that are widely different from each other, just so there's a reason to play on them. And I'm really looking forward to finishing up my work on like making the server easier to deploy and use less resources and stuff like that. So I can try to do like interesting things like we talked about in another video of a permadeath server where the rules change every few months, or a server where you can just make like a freeform character to an extent, maybe with perk points.
Mm-hmm.
Like I like your idea that you brought up earlier in the video where in the character creator where you could pick like your primary and secondary now instead if it was like several menus where you have perk points, maybe like some RPGs do it where you during character creation you could spend your perk points on certain perks, like my character gets really angry during a fight and gets extra damage, or my character gets more focused the more he fights and can dodge attacks better the longer he's fighting, or something like that. And you can just spend perk points on that while you're making a character. That would be an interesting twist to City of Heroes. Probably make it a really different game.
It would, along with being able to allocate, okay, I want more hit points. I want to do more damage. You got points, a pool point there to spend on that stuff. The amount of endurance you gain each level, the amount of damage you gain each level, things like that. That would change, like I was saying earlier at the beginning of the video, that would really change things up too. But I want to hear from you guys that are listening to this. What do you think of this idea of doing a free-formed, no archetype City Heroes build like they originally planned? Or are you not interested because they'd already done that in Champions Online? But this would be in the City of Heroes universe and have a different feel to it. So comment down below and let me know what you think of this idea. Thank you, Senpai, for jumping in on this. Any last words, Senpai?
Nope, just it was a lot of fun, and see you again next time.
Yeah, definitely. And any other developers that want to jump in on future ones, you're more than welcome. Just click on the Discord link down below and join the Discord, and then let me know in a private message that you're a developer and you want to join the developer roundtables. I will see you guys all next month for the next developer roundtable. Have a great night.